I outright condemn the Tory defence cuts because they will leave us without carrier aircraft for over 9 years. They will also have signalled the death of the British Army Armoured Corps. What is the solution? We face two major problems, strategic problems, and that is the Bin Laden crime family and China and India's rise to power. Right? Europe cannot afford to be without a hyperpower status military when it is an economic hyperpower. The problem for Britain is a reduced defence budget, which is being done for ideological reasons. Now, £38 billion worth of defence spending of the 40 billion is already committed to, and that's around £10 million a day being spent. So the government will have to follow through some projects, but let's go through the projects that it's cut. The the Royal Navy's only existing aircraft carrier will be scrapped. The Harriers will be scrapped. Nimrod, the spy plane, will be scrapped because now we're left with that with no eyes or ears for the Trident defence program, strategic nuclear weapons program. So that has been delayed for 5 years. Now, the European Union can help Britain. Why? Because the European army at present is the same size as the British army, but it doesn't have a unified command. It's brought the various different countries have command over their own troops, but we can bring together a European army which will bring our forces up to strength and parity with the United States. Now, what are those major threats? The Bin Ladens will require more and more special forces and technical expertise in the fields of cyber warfare. Now, the Tory government is going to spend £500 million on anti-cyber warfare equipment. Now, that is a good thing. So the defence review is a mixed bag, but overall I condemn it. Because you can fight a cyber war, you can fight against pandemics, but when it actually comes to invading countries, you need to be able to take and hold ground. Now, you can take ground with air power, but you must be able to hold and take ground on the ground with tanks. And without tanks, you're going to disembowel your own troops. They will not get the fire support that they need, the infantry. But tanks are a strategic asset. They're supposed to exploit and get behind the lines of the enemy to disrupt their communications, which air power can do, but it doesn't have the 24-hour staying power of armour. This is maybe one of the reasons why in Afghanistan we've had slow progress, because we've been able to take ground, but we've had to then move from the north to the south, to the east, to the west, not being able to hold ground in significant amounts because of the need for overwhelming air power and infantry tactics in Afghanistan against Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. But when we come to face a major power like China over some incident, or North Korea, because that is China's proxy, because there are major problems. If you've read a book called Asia's Deadly Triangle by Kent Calder, in the Far East, and the Far East is where most of the money is going. That's where the Americans are spending most of their money to bolster up relationships and to export their inflation to those countries, which will help their growth, of course, in the long term, and also helps America because it's getting rid of its inflation by making someone else pay its debts for it. But we also have to figure that America may not always be the power that it was, or could even become an enemy. This would be my worst case scenario, that the United States would become an enemy of the EU or Great Britain. But it is a possibility. EU's central is Eurocentric, whereas the United States no longer is Eurocentric. It is no longer caring about its own European people. It's caring more about Israel. And Israel is an enemy country of the EU, I'm afraid to say, but it's true. While Likud is in, and we will have a major problem with Israel. Until the Israeli left can get back into power, we have to consider them a threat to our security. They're a nuclear-armed theocracy in the Middle East, surrounded by enemies such as Iran, Syria, and of course Saudi Arabia, which is in league with the Bin Laden crime family because of the Saudi and Bin Laden crime family relationship. Pakistan is also a nuclear power with 200 million people, who is an enemy of the EU. What are we to do if we need to invade Pakistan because Pakistan has closed the border to Afghanistan? What are we going to use? Are we going to throw sticks and stones at them, or are we going to have Challenger 2 tanks? But what happens when the Challenger 2 tanks and heavy artillery are all scrapped? 40% of them are going to be scrapped now. What will happen in the next 4 years? What will the Tory government do when it is not fettered by any Labour or Liberal Democrat opposition? This is a great fear of mine. But China and India are increasing their armoured forces. They see themselves fighting a conventional war with unconventional asymmetric tactics being used. That is the use of cyber warfare, of terrorist-like tactics, of the use of special forces against and to shut down the idea that there is a front line. The front line will be everywhere because they will be able to shut down power plants, set off terrorist attacks, create pandemics. And in a series called The Power of Nightmares, this was all predicted, but with the counter opinion that it was just nightmares. Well, we're living in the nightmare and it's becoming real. We are facing these problems, and maybe even, I will have to say, John McCain maybe have been right, as I'm loath to say, but he may have been right. China is building a new blue water fleet, as is India. The Indians and Chinese have high advanced 4th generation jets under production. They have millions of troops. They are not friendly to the EU. In fact, China has said that it considers the EU irrelevant in the Pacific, as the Indians have said in the Indian Ocean. How can we withstand such arrogance? The EU is the largest economic power on earth. It cannot sustain this kind of barrage of insults. We must have a European army that is trained by the British and equipped by the Germans and British. And this way we will attain hyperpower status. If Britain and Europe were to combine their forces, they would already have parity with the United States, but in all areas except the sea. At sea, the EU is a coward. On land, it is a giant. But we must attain this giant status, this hyperpower status at sea. The EU must become a maritime power. We must have parity of carrier forces with the United States. This is the only way that we will be able to bargain with them as equal partners and prevent a clash between the EU and the United States and China and India and Russia. Let us not forget Russia, which is a giant power in itself. Where Russia will go and where China will go are key factors in how the world will be created. A new world will be created of global power. What we can be certain is that we are living in a multipolar world where feudalistic crime families have an inordinate amount of power. And when the states are weak, the mafias are strong. That is an old Italian Sicilian saying, and it's very true for the world that we live in today. We need a strong EU with a strong European armed forces. Thank you for listening.